The following program was made possible by the generosity of those who have determined to hold fast to the true Roman Catholic religion, as expounded by the Roman Catholic Church before the disasters of Vatican II and the so-called New Mass.
Hello and welcome to What Catholics Believe. I'm your host, Thomas Nagley. With me tonight is Father William Jenkins. He's a member of the Society of St. Pius V, also the pastor of Immaculate Conception Church right here in Norwood, Ohio. Hello, Father. How are you?
Very fine, Tom. Yourself?
Doing well. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
Joining Father Jenkins and myself is our resident legal expert, Mr. Thomas Condit. Been on the program a couple times now. It's great to have you back, Mr. Condit. How are you?
Oh, thank you. Very well, thanks.
Good deal, good deal. Well, Father Jenkins, Mr. Condit, there have been a couple of high-profile Supreme Court cases recently here in the United States that have really some rather serious ramifications for Christians in America. And so I just kind of like to get your opinion on these cases. I guess, Father, we can start with you. In general, first, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the case where the Supreme Court decided they sided with Governor Newsom in California concerning the very strict, harsh restrictions that he placed on churches, limiting the amount of attendees that are permitted to attend church services in California. So there was that one, and then just yesterday, I believe, we had the case where the Supreme Court ruled that the so-called gender identity is included in the protections of the civil rights law. So, Father, these are definitely some very, very serious decisions that are coming about. What kind of ramifications do these have for Christians in America?
Well, I fear that they have very bad, they bode very ill for those practicing the faith, especially the traditional Catholic faith. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was trying to get some good legal perspective on this. And of course, the first person I call for that is Mr. Condit.
That's right.
And so I was looking to have Mr. Condit give us some good legal insights in such a way that non-attorneys can understand this. And we see the ruling of the Supreme Court in favor, well, actually against the churches that were trying to have them overturn Governor Newsom's, as you say, harsh and restrictive requirements for public worship in California. And the court actually put aside or rejected that plea of the churches and upheld Governor Newsom's restrictions, and that concerned me. And now we have, as you say, a ruling 6-3 that the court has actually interpreted the 1964 Civil Rights Act to include gender identity, right, as a protection, as protected under law against discrimination. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, well, they're playing philosopher again, because in 1973, with the Roe versus Wade decision, they decided to play philosophy and decide they were going to have to deal with the issue of when human life begins. And so they went from being judges in civil law to playing philosopher and used such expressions as potential life and so on in their rulings. And I thought maybe they're playing philosopher again, in trying to philosophize and adjust the definition, right, of even of sex itself. So I thought that Mr. Condit's insights would be much appreciated. I know I appreciate them, and I expect that our viewers would get a lot from them too. So I'm going to actually pass the question back through you to Mr. Condit, if that's okay.
Mr. Condit, I see you set up your official legal shop here.
Well, I've got a few notes. I want to let you know you broke my first cardinal rule by calling me an expert.
Oh, okay.
I never let anyone call me an expert.
I see.
Well, let me pick up on the California thing first, which is really a much smaller thing with smaller ramifications and simpler to address. At first, going into both of these things, though, I brought with me a quote that Justice Souter, another really disappointing Republican appointee of the Bush family, years ago made a statement in an opinion that I don't think was a case of great import for people like us, but it was an interesting one line that he wrote, and I actually kept it because I thought I'd already witnessed this being true, and especially in representing Christians and their civil liberties through the years. In a case, Justice Souter said, "Of course, there is usually a case somewhere that provides comfort for just about any claim." I found that to be true. Now, and what even happens here, in other words, judges, there's principles of law out there everywhere, some case, some context, that may not be transferable to some other context. But it will be. I mean, if someone finds a good quote, if these judges find a good quote that likes to take them where they want to go, it's there somewhere. Okay, that's what Justice Souter is saying. And any legal decision, it turns on the facts and it turns on the law, and you start changing the facts, and the law, the application of the law might change. And this California we'll call it a decision, is a great example of that, because what that case is about, and I've already lost it here. Doesn't take me long. All right, that's South Bay United Pentecostal Church versus Gavin Newsom,
That's right, yeah.
Government of California.
Yeah.
So this was this is something that we can feel not as threatened by because of the nature of the decision. This was an application to the U.S. Supreme Court after a lower court made an unfavorable decision for the church, which tried to go into court and get an order protecting their religious freedom, the church, the population that could go to church on Sundays against these very restrictive orders that we've seen here in Ohio and elsewhere. And after the lower court gave an unfavorable decision, the church applied for an injunction to the U.S. Supreme Court. In other words, it's a very quick thing. The full case is not even in front of the Supreme Court yet. And the justices, the 9 justices of the Supreme Court all have a different region or circuit in the country where they hear applications like this and decide them on their own. And this one went to Justice Kagan, seeking relief for the church, and she denied it. And so the denial of that application generated 2 opinions. One was opinion of Chief Justice Roberts, a concurring opinion in the denial. So he gave a reason. He wrote why he agreed with the denial. And that was just a little 3-page opinion. And then Justice Kavanaugh, joined by Justice Thomas and Justice Gorsuch, wrote a dissenting opinion saying why they would have granted the injunction to stay the order there in California. So these opinions aren't really opinions of the court. These won't have great precedential value in the future. It's simply the denial of an injunction at the earliest stage of a case, which may turn out differently later once the case is fully brought before the court. So it's just a very preliminary thing.
Is the case going to be fully brought before the court?
I'm assuming it will, but it also, I guess, could become moot at some point,
Sure.
right? If California loosens things up, and by the time the court deals with it, it might be a moot point. But significant, just to explain to people and to pick up on my statement about Justice Souter's quote and the facts change and the laws change. Let me just read a couple things to give people a feel for what most sensible people feel in their guts, that something's wrong here and it seems to be a moving target at all times. We never can really seem to satisfy the courts no matter what we do, or there's always some reason and so here's an example of it. So the California had guidelines currently limiting attendance at places of worship to 25% of building capacity or a maximum of 100 attendees. So that's what they were trying to attack. And Justice Roberts wrote this opinion agreeing with the denial of any relief. And his statement was, this is his view of the facts. Okay, he says, although California's guidelines place restrictions on places of worship, those restrictions appear consistent with the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. Similar or more severe restrictions apply to comparable secular gatherings, including lectures, concerts, movie showings, spectator sports, and theatrical performances, where large groups of people gather in close proximity for extended periods of time. And the order exempts or treats more leniently only dissimilar activities, such as operating grocery stores, banks, and laundromats, in which people neither congregate in large groups nor remain in close proximity for extended periods. Now, first of all, this is one justice giving his view of the facts as he sees them about life and laundromats, I suppose. Okay, that's his opinion. But then you go to Justice Kavanaugh. And he says the basic constitutional problem is that comparable secular businesses are not subject, so they just have a different view of the facts completely, are not comparable, are not subject to a 25% occupancy cap, including factories, offices, supermarkets, restaurants, retail stores, pharmacies, shopping malls, pet grooming shops, bookstores, floors, hair salons, and cannabis dispensaries.
Good.
So he lays out a lot more. Why didn't the idea of large factories? Why didn't that get into Justice Roberts' laundry list of things? Well, how about retail stores, shopping malls? See, he just leaves those out to say, oh, this is okay. They're all being treated equally. So that's the essence of that. Basically, two justices taking a very different view of the facts, or at least publishing a different view of the facts.
Now, Tom, if I may ask you this question, something troubles me about this, okay? The very idea, though, that the standard that is being used here is that, well, these restrictions that are being placed on the churches and those attending those churches for worship are comparable to the restrictions being placed on retail businesses and so on. Doesn't religion have more of a standing before the law than secular business, in their constitution, or no? In our tradition as a country. So why are they using that as a standard to judge, whether this is, as long as we're imposing no more restrictions on churches than we are on, let's say, penny arcades, right? Soda,
right.
Candy stores and so on. Is that a fair standard of judgment in our country?
Well, two things. You are right. Shopping malls and laundromats aren't in the First Amendment, right?
Okay, well,
there we go.
Not the last time I looked.
Yeah, so you're right about that. I think the principle of law that, hopefully I'll articulate it here correctly, that I don't think we would generally find objectionable is that the government had to oppose certain things. Let's say fire safety. Fire safety should apply just as much to a church and a school as it should to any place. We don't want anybody getting killed in a fire, and therefore religion may not get any special treatment there because it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with fires. So that's the principle, that sometimes, as long as you're not literally disfavoring religion, then the secular purpose of something applies equally to religious institutions.
Couldn't we make the case that religious institutions are being, disfavored compared to other things? We have Home Depot is considered an essential business now, while churches a lot of churches are mandated to be shut. Is that not, placing, or even laundromats not higher now than churches?
And I think that's what Justice Kavanaugh is saying. Is that, he's doing a more fair comparison and saying that no, they are being disfavored here. So that's two different justices going different places with really a different set of facts. And then from that, they cite some case law that kind of kicks in Justice Souter's thing. If you want to go somewhere, there's always going to be a case somewhere that you can pull a quote out and use it. But in the end, so the California Church in the end did not get any immediate relief from the burdens of the California governor's order. Which is a problem, because it's going to go on for months probably. And the other thing about this, and I never want to get too legalistic here, because but as I read it, Justice Roberts, in his explanation, made a distinction between the fact that the church sought an injunction against the governor's order instead of just a stay of the order, which. And he makes some legal distinction, and the standard's higher for an injunction, all that. But in real terms, and I've dealt with injunctions in my life, in real terms, to me it's a distinction without a difference.
Yeah.
Whether it's if it's a preliminary injunction, which could always be rescinded, or a stay, saying we're just keeping the status quo, which is really all an injunction does. A preliminary injunction, or a temporary restraining order. People have heard of restraining orders.
Right.
These are like, keep the status quo, we're not changing anything until we have a chance to develop more evidence or something. Roberts made a big distinction between the two, suggesting that if they had only sought a stay and not an injunction, which has a higher standard, then maybe we could have granted this. And I'm completely unpersuaded by that. I don't think there's a true difference there. Not in this case, there isn't.
Do you think he's being disingenuous?
Well, probably.
I see. Okay.
He wouldn't. Mr. Khan, I have a question for you, just from a simple layperson perspective. What is the definition of a judge, of their responsibility? I think we often hear that their role is to interpret the law, and as a professional interpreter myself, I can tell you that interpretation by its very nature is subjective, and so you have as many different interpretations as you have interpreters. But there's a very, very, very large distinction between an interpretation and a translation. And I think that perhaps could we say that rather than merely interpreting the law, a judge's role is to apply the law, and not just kind of have this vague person-by-person subjective interpretation of the law?
I guess I'd say yes or no. Well, first of all, let's keep in mind the constitutional standard. Judges are supposed to decide cases and controversies. Yeah. Right? Even the U.S. Supreme Court, this really gets lost. The U.S. Supreme Court is deciding a case. This Title VII case decided yesterday under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That was a case involving some very specific parties, right? Smith sued Jones or whatever. And they're deciding that case. But what they've become through the years with these decrees about what's in the Constitution is something akin to a king. Just they issue these decrees that not only decide that case, they change the laws and the moralities of an entire country, right? Because their decisions, when they decide a case, that's binding precedent. So by necessity, all like cases should be decided under that under federal law at least. But I just don't think it ever was intended to become what it has become, which is
an oligarchy.
Okay, right. Now here comes this decision. Now all of our lives are going to change, even though there was only about 10 people who were parties to that case.
Just like Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, just like, Roe v. Wade struck down the abortion laws of all 50 states. A little lawsuit between Norma McCorvey suing the Attorney General of Texas. Look what it did to all of us. So that's my first answer to your question. The other question is, you made a distinction between applying the law and interpreting the law, and I'm not sure how bad I'll fumble if I try to start getting into that. I will say this: there are rules of statutory construction, for example, that certain words are going to be or mean certain things. For example, shall does not mean maybe. Shall means shall. Right? There's all kinds of rules of statutory construction when judges have to look at a law and decide what it means. And so, and that's where you get into this whole battle of someone being a strict constructualist or a textualist versus, the living, breathing Constitution and the living, breathing laws, where we're basically going to update this and this is what happened. Now, if we're moving into that area, a majority of the U.S. Supreme Court decided to update the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to give it meaning in the era of transgenderism in the year 2020. That's what they decided to do. And Justice Alito's dissent, which was very strong and evoked warm memories of Justice Scalia writing his dissents, he started his opinion, which I've already probably messed up with staples here. Here's the first sentence of Justice Alito's dissent. There is only one word for what the court has done today: legislation.
Okay.
There it is. Mm-hmm. I just said. So they did not interpret anything. They just updated it to bring us into the. I mean, understand this. So they have said, what they have said is discrimination based on sex equates to discrimination based on sexual orientation and discrimination based on transgender status. These are now all the same thing, and they have the same rank now as race or age for discrimination, right? So
in 1964, there was no thought of these things.
There was
right?
no thought of these things. But it's worse than that. And Alito and then Kavanaugh in his dissent to some extent also make that very point. And Alito makes the point that even now there are two different bills, I think one in the House, one in the Senate, that are just frozen in motion, where the Democrats have tried to get sexual orientation and transgenderism amended into that act, so that those would also be rights. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't pass through Congress. They're suspended, they're tabled or whatever. They're sitting in Congress right now. So even our modern legislators understand that those things aren't yet in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Mm-hmm. They tried to get them in, they didn't have the votes. And Alito makes that point.
Well, that's interesting.
How disingenuous it is.
The Supreme Court just took it into the law into their own hands?
Right, that's what they did. And to get back again to the idea of interpretation, if the words are not clear, the principle is that you look at the words as they were meant at the time they were written. Mm-hmm. And therefore, as you said, Father, homosexuality was a known disorder and indeed classified as a psychiatric disorder in 1964. Yep. Right? Transgenderism probably was only in the most perverse minds at the time, and it wasn't part of the national dialogue at all. So the odds that the senators and representatives in 1964 had those things in mind, we all know, the odds of that are virtually non-existent. We know that. And therefore, the 2020 Supreme Court decided to legislate them in under the guise of a judicial decision.
Father Jenkins, what's a Catholic perspective on all of this? Obviously, it doesn't bode well for our country. It seems that our own government is kind of unleashing these direct attacks on Christians and just anyone who loves that, has any kind of love for the truth. What is a good Catholic perspective on these events?
I mean, traditional Catholics would have to see that as an attack on reality, attack on God, His sovereignty, His creation, right? Have to look upon it as a gratuitous assertion of the rights of perversion in our society. And this is what I was going to ask Mr. Gallett about. What are the practical consequences of this for churches, for religion, that sees these things as perversions and as things that are gravely sinful and things that we cannot endorse, we cannot approve of, we cannot even allow to be part of our operations, so we have to make sure that these things do not enter into the churches, right, and the operation of the church or anything that the church is responsible for, schools and so on. So such that if someone were to say, well, I've been Father so-and-so here at this New Order parish here, But I'm coming back next year to teach school as Sister, Mary Relevant or whatever. And that could happen today. I mean, oddly enough, it could happen today. Or, well, a number of things that I don't necessarily want to get into right now, but people have enough of an imagination to understand what kind of perversions could come from this. And are there any protections for this, or is this actually telling any religious body that stands against this that they are in the crosshairs of the government now, and notably in the crosshairs of the LGBTQ movement?
Right.
We're going to come after them to put them on the spot in order to destroy them.
Right. Well, first of all, have no doubt that the LGBT movement they will come after everybody. And they were coming after everybody aggressively before they had rights in order to get the rights. So they're coming, and it's bad, ominous news for secular society for sure. Now, let me naively give a ray of hope to the religious in this world, at least because the U.S. Supreme Court has written these things. And we'll see what kind of staying power they have over time. But in the Obergefell decision, and other than my recent appearances here, my last flurry of appearances on what Catholics believe was back in when the gay marriage decision, some of those came down. So the Obergefell decision, which declared that gay marriage is in the U.S. Constitution, they did, at the end of their opinion, say this: finally, it must be emphasized that religions and those who adhere to religious doctrines may continue to advocate with utmost sincere conviction that by divine precepts, same-sex marriage should not be condoned. The First Amendment ensures that religious organizations and persons are given proper protection as they seek to teach the principles that are so fulfilling and so central to their lives and faiths, and to their own deep aspirations to continue the family structure they have long revered. So, I think they knew they had to do this. That they had to at least throw the bone to the religious organizations that they do actually have First Amendment rights still.
That was supposed to be reassuring.
Yeah, that was supposed to be reassuring, and now, so that's there. Now, at the end...
the date of that was...
The date of that was... I think it was 2015 when it came out.
I think so.
15 or 16. So then we have by the way, the name of this decision yesterday is Bostock versus Clayton County, Clayton County, Georgia. So the majority opinion was 33 pages, and here I'm about to read what's on page 32. Okay. It says separately, the employers, those are the ones who lost that case, the employers fear that complying with Title VII's requirement in cases like ours may require some employers to violate their religious convictions. We are also deeply concerned with preserving the promise of the free exercise of religion enshrined in our Constitution. That guarantee lies at the heart of our pluralistic society. But worries about how Title VII may intersect with religious liberties are nothing new. They even predate the statute's passage. As a result of its deliberations in adopting the law, Congress included an express statutory exception for religious organizations. This court has also recognized that the First Amendment can bar the application of employment discrimination laws, quote, to claims concerning the employment relationship between a religious institution and its ministers, and they cite a case. And Congress has gone a step further yet in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. That statute prohibits the federal government from substantially burdening a person's exercise of religion unless it demonstrates that doing so both furthers a blah, 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 legalese. So there's nothing terribly reassuring about the way that particular passage ends, but they're at least acknowledging that there's problem. And if I remember something else in this opinion, this Bostock case went before the Supreme Court without any religious issues being asserted. So it was not on religious grounds that this case was decided, and they've kind of said that that's ultimately going to be for another day.
Now, this is written by Gorsuch, is that right?
That's right.
The majority of the
Right.
okay.
So they, twice now in 5 years, they acknowledge, as they have to, that the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has not gone away, and they're going to have to, deal with and accommodate as a constitutional right the religious institutions on this kind of thing. But
We've got two conflicting rights now, right? Civil rights.
we do, and the First Amendment should always prevail over a statute. The Constitution prevails over statutes.
Right.
So that should not be any question even, really.
Right.
But
do you foresee it becoming a question?
I absolutely foresee it becoming a question.
It looks as though they've kind of set up this showdown.
Yeah.
It's a high noon, right? And you note that they're going to force this issue, right?
Oh, there's no question. You just imagine just imagine the homosexuals and all the derivations of that that have been quietly teaching in a school somewhere, and then suddenly, now they're going to. Because as I think I've said on this show before, this idea that they just want to live in harmony and be members of the community and be left alone, I mean, that's about the most monumental lie that's out there about the gay and lesbian. They are here to make us bend the knee. They are not here just for peace and acceptance. I determined that in depositions I took 17 years ago. Okay, so that is not what they're about.
And I think that's such an important point to make, because they're built as this kind of warriors fighting for equal rights and this great just cause and everything. But like Father said, this is two totally different rights here. We talk about the gay marriage decision there, and they're claiming that they're fighting for equal rights, but in fact this is an entirely new right. I mean, you look at what right do your average everyday heterosexual American, what right do they have in regards to marriage? It's to marry one member of the opposite sex. Well, that same right perfectly applies to any homosexual person. They have that exact same right to marry one person of the opposite sex. But what they're asking for here is an entirely new right.
Right. This is what's called special class status. I mean, that's why you see a lot of people that, the blue collar white guy who just says, "Where are my rights?" I mean, I'm getting, guys that apply to be, policemen or firemen. They got these tests, and they have the physical tests and written examinations to become a fireman, and lots of times the minorities are given 10 points right off the top, okay, so he's black, they get 10 points, the Hispanics get 15
it's like
points.
Reverse
It is absolutely that, and it's called affirmative action, of course. But that's exactly why you get the
What is the legal definition of this this kind of discrimination where we're talking about this discrimination against the gender equality movement? I recently was watching a documentary concerning the Middle Ages, and the presenter of this documentary said that the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, they practiced a lot of discrimination. They were really definitely discriminated, but they discriminated against groups like murderers, rapists, pillagers, and things like this. So in that instance, discrimination was in fact a good thing. So what is the legal definition of discrimination? Can it be good? Can it be bad? What is it?
I don't have
Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
But it brings to mind the writings of the late great Joseph Sobran, who once commented that words like gay and discrimination used to be perfectly good words. And now they've been completely...
well, they probably would say discrimination against people for these reasons, right?
Right.
Not because of crime, but because of exercising their civil rights. To discriminate them against them for that would be unacceptable. Something people have to realize, all of us, to keep in mind that whenever a right is accorded to anyone, even a single individual, it imposes an obligation on everyone else, right, to recognize that right, to yield to that right, to honor that right. So every time a right is recognized as belonging to an individual or a group of people, everyone else in the society now has a burden of an obligation under law to honor that right and has to bow before that right, right? And I mean, courts have to decide, I guess, Tom, you would know, about how to balance rights. You were just saying, well, statute has to yield to Constitution, right?
Right.
But the fact is, it all comes down to this: that when everybody claims a right, it's claiming everyone else has a burden on them to recognize my right. And so, we hear about, oh, look, isn't that nice? They recognize these people have a right to be happy doing what they're doing, whatever it might be, and we should all want them to be happy, right? It's a lot more than that. There's much more to it than that. It imposes an obligation, a burden, a duty on everybody else in the society to recognize and honor that right, whether their conscience permits it or not. Legally, they're bound to acknowledge that. But we have entered into a time in our society where, well, for example, would you consider it to be discrimination for me, or to be racist, or to be whatever, a certain segment of the population, if I said, look, there are certain black people who've committed violent crimes, and so as far as I'm concerned, I regard all black people as guilty of violent crimes. I would say, well, there are some black people who are looting stores, so as far as I'm concerned, they're all looters, right? Will you consider that just or unjust?
Unjust.
Of course it would be unjust, right? I'd be embarrassed to think that, and I wouldn't say it if I thought it was true, because I know it's not true. It's not just, but in the name of justice now, we're saying all white people are racist, because some white people are racist, right? All policemen are guilty of police brutality, because some are. In the name of justice, now, we're saying that, right? In the name of justice, we're saying that all cops have to be defunded. They all have to go, right? The entire idea of a police force has to be abandoned now, because some police have been unworthy of the call that they've made, that they've answered there, and answered badly. So I'm going to say now, in justice, I have to disband and defund all the police, right? I have to demonize all the white people because, again, a few are guilty of these things. So the very concept of justice here now, where people are abusing this word, and it really is disgraceful. Who was saying recently that when you adopt the vocabulary of the opposition, you've already lost the battle, right?
I saw that attributed to Confucius, I think.
Well, there you go. It has a certain pedigree, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's a true. I think the conservative side of the political spectrum commits that error all the time.
Today's conservatives are yesterday's liberals.
Yeah. I mean, you recall, Father, I once made a little public speech at Planned Parenthood where I said we need to get the term abortionist back into. Let's quit calling them abortion doctors, or because they hate the word abortionist. That for whatever reason they hate that. The judges hate it. They don't want that used in a courtroom.
Right. Pro-choice.
Yeah, pro-choice. Yeah, we got to get away from all that. So I agree with that. So now, Father, I did want to say you really put meat on the bone of one of my favorite Joe Sobernisms when you were now these are high compliments. Sobern said, "Why is it that every time the court discovers a new right, the rest of us are less free?" That's exactly what you were saying.
Okay.
Yeah, and so. If there was a question dangling, maybe we've beaten it to death.
Well, the Catholic perspective is what this program is really all about, after all. And I thank you very much for telling us the legal ramifications of this and what we can expect, because people hear about these decisions. They're watching the news, listening to the news. ladies and gentlemen of the press are interpreting it for everyone, right? Chortling with joy about what a great triumph this is for these poor, poor oppressed LGBTQ people. And people might be tending to join in the party, in the celebration, without realizing, wait a minute, I just lost my liberties. I've just had a burden imposed upon me now to go along with this. Even those who might not have a problem with LGBTQ, even they are going to be in a situation now where they might have to let somebody go because of malfeasance, theft, who knows what else. But all they have to do is appeal to the fact, well, gee, I'm L or B or G or TQM, LI, we, whatever it is, and that's why you let me go. And you have to prove to the court now that that's not why you really fired me. So it puts everybody at risk.
Oh, right. Just the cost of defense, the cost of legal defense is going to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 20 years as these people come after everybody around them.
It just amazes me that Gorsuch and Roberts, right, could so blithely just sign off on this. Something that so completely shakes to its foundations our very national existence.
Right. Yes. And
the liberties of all of these people in this country sacrificed.
To make the point that I'm not just here like lashing out. I mean, there in the last 8 years have been these high-profile cases from around the country of the baker with the wedding cake, the florist with the flowers, the photographer, all these gay wedding things that they come to the Christians, wanting the Christians to provide this for our gay wedding. The case now, I don't keep the case names in my head. If I heard them, I'd know them. But the florist in particular was a case that struck me as very sad and very illustrative of the point that the florist who got sued by the homosexuals because she did not, she just wasn't comfortable and was compelled against contributing to their gay wedding. These were ongoing customers of hers. She had always served them. She considered them friends. They had to know what she was like. And yet they went after her. This was someone who they went after her. They
wanted to destroy her.
They wanted to destroy her. They wanted to make the Christian bend her knee. They were willing to destroy a friend and someone who had treated them well, rather than going to any one of who knows how many other florists would have, without controversy, given them exactly what they wanted. People need to understand this is what we're dealing with. I've seen it. I've just seen it again and again. They're not what they claim to be.
Well, Tom, it was always the church historically that would stand up for the true rights, God-given rights of people, right? But now the modernists have so completely laid waste the church, right? Their new order church is not only prostrate in the dust, but where it is not only absolutely impotent to oppose these things, it is actually favoring these things and promoting these things and applauding these things, okay? And you have a faint voice here and there every now and then that is raised to say, but I object, and they are immediately plowed under by the fellow clergy and members of the Novus Ordo, the New Order Church. And so what Archbishop Vigano said recently in his letter is so true, that after Vatican II there was formed this parallel church, which is kind of like the opposite of the real true Catholic Church, and that's what we're dealing with now. And so there are very few voices now that can be raised in order to protest these things and stand up for the genuine rights of the people. The result of that is going to be that their rights are going to be just trampled down, trodden underfoot, and it's going to be mob rule. We see that beginning in this country, but it's the result of a long process. And this is, again, just one phase of that process. I'm afraid that we see what lies ahead is just something. It's going to get worse and worse, right? So at this point, you can't call upon any holy father to stand up, right, and defend as a father the flock, right? But nonetheless, Our Lady told us that we do have a Father in heaven, clearly, who certainly cares for us. And we also have a Mother in heaven, Blessed Mother herself, right, whom God has placed in that position for us. So we have to seriously pray. We have to pray very hard for our country. We have to pray for the people of our country. But at the same time, if we're going to pray courageously, we've got to pray with conviction. We've got to pray with courage. And we've got to stand up for what is right. And we've got to let our voices be heard and denounce this as being wrong. And not be caving in all the time because we're afraid of the consequences. We see this happening in what's going on throughout the country right now. People who are in a position of authority, where they should use that authority for the good of the nation, are caving in because of pressure, right? Brought by anarchists, revolutionaries, leftists, Marxists, right? Who are bludgeoning them with shame or bludgeoning them with threats, Give in, give in, give in. And so we give and give and give. There have to be some people who will stand sort of like the prophets of old and not yield. There was the story is going around, I'm sure there are plenty of accounts to back it up, that these protesters with the BLM are surrounding white people mostly and insisting that they take a knee. And if they don't, they get beaten up. If they do, they get beaten up too. Insisting they take a knee before their stores are looted. Of course, the stores are looted anyway, whether they take the knee or not. But the point is, you mentioned taking a knee, bending the knee. You mentioned that a number of times. It is so symbolic. It is so symbolic. Our own sheriff here did that, right? For the line of protesters, Antifa, BLM, and all, insisting, take a knee. Take a knee, it might appease them. Well, whatever it meant to him, that's not what it means to them. What it means to them is submission, and admission that we are right, and you are wrong, and you're guilty, and we have every right to oppress you now, right? In response to what you've done. You owe it to us now, your submission. Imagine the example that's set to the other officer who was supposed to be standing there and as a wall of defense, right? It's against society, on behalf of society against these revolutionaries, these anarchists. Now, there are some legitimate protesters there, I'm sure, who were there, for honest reasons, right? Unfortunately, the leftists they smell like shark's blood in the water, right. And they're right there to use that. Right. And I'm sorry that the legitimate protesters would allow them to come in and to destroy the very legitimacy of their protest and divert it into something that they don't want, right. I'm sure. But nonetheless, the fact is, the more you give them, the more they're going to take. They're emboldened by this. And so we have to be emboldened by our faith and by our love for God. And we have to put it in those terms, not just that, well, I'm tired of giving way. It's not just that. It's a matter of standing up for what is right. It's a matter of standing up for our faith, for our church, for our families, for our God. And we have to take that as a sacred duty.
Right. Father, you said a couple of things that have triggered reactions.
Joe Sober?
No sobernism came to mind, but a couple of things. First of all, what you were just describing, actually not Joe Sober, my dad always would say some people mistake kindness for weakness, and they just keep coming for more. They keep trying to push it further. And that's very much, I think, what you've described.
But maybe it's not a mistake.
Yeah, no, it's not a mistake. Right, it's not a mistake.
Some people would portray weakness, they portray it as kindness,
right?
But it really is weakness. Right?
Well, and some right. So another contrast I was thinking as you were talking, You know, back in the really hard street activist days of the pro-life movement in the 80s and the 90s in particular, if anyone was in any way violent, or, you know, you'd have some abortion clinic bombings or fire or arsons once a year, once every couple of years maybe, all pro-lifers were violent, right? The news media, it's a violent movement. They're all violent, right? Now, the exact opposite's happening here. As long as a couple of these people out at the riots are peaceful, they're all peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
You're right. It's a complete
Mostly
flip.
people riot.
Yeah, the rioters are to be discarded because this is a peaceful First Amendment assembly. That's exactly the narrative we get. It's completely the opposite of how the pro-lifers were treated in the media, 30 years ago. The other thing, I brought a few things I found of interest, and maybe this would be the way I can close with this. You, Father, were talking about the need to stand up and be lions, in the face of all this instead of giving in. I want to read the contrast between, from two dissenting opinions, both Catholics, but Justice Scalia being the lion, and then compare that to what Justice Kavanaugh just wrote at the end of his dissent in this Bostock case. So in Justice Scalia dissenting from the gay marriage decision 5 years ago, wrote in his dissent, "It is clear from this that the court has taken sides in the culture war, departing from its role of assuring as neutral observer that the democratic rules of engagement are observed. Many Americans do not want persons who openly engage in homosexual conduct as partners in their business, as scoutmasters for their children, as teachers in their children's schools, or as boarders in their home. They view this as protecting themselves and their families from a lifestyle that they believe to be immoral and destructive." So that's Scalia holding the line against the renegade liberal majority. Now, Justice Kavanaugh, dissenting in the Bostock case yesterday, wrote really what I didn't read it carefully, but scanning it, it looked like a very solid analysis of why the statutory interpretation of the majority was way out of bounds. It was a pretty solid analysis. But then at the end of the opinion, he throws this little nugget out there. "Notwithstanding my concern about the court's transgression of the Constitution's separation of powers, it is appropriate to acknowledge the important victory achieved today by gay and lesbian Americans. Millions of gay and lesbian Americans have worked hard for many decades to achieve equal treatment in fact and in law. They have exhibited extraordinary vision, tenacity, and grit, battling often steep odds in the legislative and judicial arenas, not to mention their daily lives. They have advanced powerful policy arguments and can take pride in today's result."
So, in other words,
He disagreed with the decision.
This decision attacks the Constitution of the United States of America, but congratulations.
Yes.
Okay. Isn't that wonderful?
That's probably...
You've accomplished something admirable.
There's the protege of Justice Kennedy right there.
Oh, my goodness.
So what can we expect from Justice Kavanaugh in the future? I'm not going to bet a lot on him.
Bodes ill.
Wow, that's incredible.
Well, Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion. He's a Trump justice. Kavanaugh wrote that, okay,
He's a Trump
on the other
justice.
side, and he's a Trump justice.
Yeah.
And this is as good as it gets right now. We're in hot water.
Yep.
We're in trouble.
Yep.
Wow.
You notice in the Old Testament, the prophets were railing against the judges of Israel because of their injustice, because of their destruction of the rights that God gives, right? And how unjust they were. And I fear we're entering a period of time when God's judgment of our judgments is going to be very severe.
And Father, one last point I wanted to make is, several things we've said throughout tonight's program really just remind one of Satan, really, of just these demonic activities that we see from the left and the so-called LGBTQ, whatever it is, crowd, where, we talked about this idea of them not really having any true friends, where they'll turn against their friends, and what is that but Satanism, where there's no true love, even if they are any kind of bond there. It's not any kind of real true friendship. We talked about this idea of constantly bending the knee, bowing down to them. Well, what was that but Satan's temptation to our Lord that we read about in St. Matthew's Gospel. And so many other things. The more you give them, the more they want to take. That's Satanism to a T. So really, this isn't a fight necessarily against the Supreme Court justices or against any members of the LGBT crowd. It's really a fight against principalities and powers. I mean, this is a fight against the powers of hell. And I know, Father, you recently asked that we all begin praying the litany to Saint Michael the Archangel. I think that's a wonderful idea, something we can do for our country here, and I think that would be...
all the more reason now, because as if to put an exclamation point on what you've said here, this Sunday, the vernal equinox, we have get this, Luciferian March for global government.
That's right.
For one world government. Luciferian March, they call it that. Luciferian March for one world government, going down here in Platt Park in Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati, beginning at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, June 21st, right? There's going to be a solar eclipse. They're talking about the Ring of Fire. They're talking about the blood moon. They're saying all of this is coming together, and they're doing this to fulfill, they say, the Luciferians, the revelations. Now, is that supposed to be the book of the Apocalypse? What's in the book of Revelation, as it's called sometimes? They just say in the Revelations, right? So this is going down right here in the heart of Cincinnati this Sunday, and we'll see what comes of that. The Women's March, with all of its ribald viciousness, savagery, and foulness of language. I mean, all of these people use the F word. Mm-hmm. Every other word they say, practically, is an obscenity, right? And I guess it's supposed to make them sound angry as a substitute for intelligent, right? That's supposed to be the way they express their outrage. But now, from the same part, this Luciferian March is proceeding now. So we'll see what comes of that. But I see that, as you do, I think, as a natural development of all of these things, right? Going back to abortion, going back to Roe versus Wade, it's all of a piece. It's a development of the same basic ideas. Where's it going to end? Well, for some in hell and for others in heaven. But what happens in the meantime? People are going to be here raising their children in the midst of this mess. So, Satan wants to create hell on earth. And I'm afraid he's certainly laid the foundations for it, hasn't he?
For what it's worth, we have some First Amendment rights down at that park, even during their demonstration.
Do we really?
Yes, we do.
Maybe we ought to assert those rights.
Wow. Well, Mr. Condit, any final comments before we close here?
I don't think so. I think I've said my
Said
piece.
it all. All right, sounds good. Father Jenkins, final comments?
Just God bless you all. We have a lot to fight for. And we might be frightened because we have so much to lose. But the very fact that we have so much to lose is because we have so much. We have so much, and so much to be grateful for. If we're afraid of losing it because we have so much to lose, that should remind us how much we have and how much we have to be grateful for. So there's the first step. Be grateful to God for the blessings we have, and accept the responsibility that comes with them. Because with rights come responsibilities. Those who are attacking our rights now don't want responsibilities. They want all the rights and no responsibilities. And they want us to look upon our rights as mere privileges that they allow us to have but can take away at any time. And we can't allow that because those are God-given rights. We have to fight for them, even as we fight for our faith and we fight for our Lord himself and his prerogatives and his rights. We have to fight for God's rights. So if we're not ready for the fight, then we don't deserve the rights that we have. And we've already forfeited them anyway. It's just a matter of time because they're completely taken away if we're not willing to fight for them. So I ask you to please, get on your knees and fold your hands and pray to God. But then, when you get off your knees, be ready for the fight because it's coming. It's here now.
Well, Father Jenkins, Mr. Condit, thank you both for being here tonight.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Yep. Thanks to all of our viewers as well for watching this episode of What Catholics Believe. Until next time, we ask that you all remember the words of Our Lady of Fatima, to consecrate yourselves and your families to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and to pray and do penance. Thank you, and God bless you.